In this lecture, we're going to write a story. According to the ink documentation, the text written inside an ink file is considered a story. The question is, what kind of story will we create? Let's say our NPC lives on the island. They're being bullied by the orcs who stole our NPC's candy. This candy can be found inside the treasure chest. The NPC should ask us if we have their candy. If we do, they'll thank us. Otherwise, they'll ask us to come back when we find their candy. Overall, it's a very simple story. Let's start writing it. In Unity, we can open the Inky application by double-clicking on Ink Files. If the application doesn't open for you, you must open the file manually from the editor. Let's clear the contents of the file. We're going to start with a fresh story. The editor for writing a story is straightforward. On the left, we can write our story. To the right, we are given a preview, which is updated in real time. Let's write the beginning of our story. Write the following with me. A long time ago, a couple of orcs stole my candy. It would be nice if I could get it back. By chance, have you come across my candy? A short and simple story. We've written the story on a single line. However, that may not be a good idea. Players may be playing on a low resolution with limited space. We should always consider how dialogue gets rendered on the screen. The more text, the more room we'll need. This varies from game to game. I think it would be a good idea to put each sentence into a separate line. Breaking a story into separate lines will make it easier to display it to the player. Behind the scenes, Ink sends each line to our game. We're not given the entire story. If we want the next line, we must explicitly ask for it. Reading the story for the first time will output the first line. After asking for the next line, it'll be sent. Lastly, the third line will be sent. If we ask for a line after the last line, Ink will inform us that we've reached the end of the story. So far, so good. Our NPC is going to have multiple dialogues. For example, if the player completes the quest, the NPC shouldn't repeat their story. Instead, they should thank the player for helping them earlier. One option would be to create a new story. Luckily, we don't have to do that. In a single story, we can create different sections of dialogue called knots. I'm going to position my cursor at the top of the file. Next, under the Ink menu, navigate to Basic Structure Knot. Select this option. At the top of the file, a knot has been created. Knots are created by writing the name of the knot with 3 equals characters on both sides of the name. Below the knot, we can write the story for this section. I'm going to remove the lines created by the editor. Let's set the name of the knot to Start. The name may not contain spaces. It must follow the rules of variables for C#. The knot we've created will be the starting point for our NPC. They will always initiate dialogue from this section. After creating the knot, we're given an error. The Inky editor was designed to help us write stories while helping us catch errors with its special syntax rules. Technically, we could use Visual Studio Code, but we would miss out on these errors. If we hover our mouse over the error, it states that we haven't closed the knot. As mentioned before, we can create multiple knots within a given story. We must explicitly set the start and end of the knot. At the end of the knot, let's add the following: dash greater than end. We've added a divert. A divert instructs the story to skip to a knot. So, once the player reaches the end of the section, the story will jump to another knot. By default, all stories have a built-in knot called end, which ends the story. If the story were to be reread, it would start from the beginning. There's another divert built into the editor called done. Both diverts will end the story. However, the end divert will end the story completely, whereas the done divert will stop the story but allow the story to flow elsewhere. If you want to end the dialogue but not reset the story, you should use the done divert over the end divert. In our case, we're interested in ending the story entirely, so let's use end. If we look at the preview, nothing appears. Outsourcing a section of a story into a knot will not automatically cause the story to display the section. You can think of it as defining a method without calling it. At the top of the file, we can start playing the knot by adding a divert. Let's set the divert to start. It's the name assigned to our knot. After adding the divert, the preview is functioning normally. To recap, the flow of the story starts at the beginning. We're instructing the story to jump to the start knot. After doing so, it'll start displaying the section's lines. Eventually, it'll reach the end, thus concluding our story. So far, we have one knot. We recreated the same behavior at the start of the lecture. In the next lecture, let's add more knots for different parts of the story.